Hey everyone, Ben Coomber Radio, episode number 295. Welcome to the show. So this week is just a little bit different. This week there isn't going to be one show. There's going to be 3 shows released on one day. I know, different. It's usually only one show. Each of these shows is going to be broken down into about 20 minutes, and what you might be asking is, who on earth is on this show? Well, I have been up and spoken to Ben and Steve. Who are Ben and Steve? They are the British Triathlon coaches. And we're going to be talking to them, I'm going to be talking to them all about triathlon and how to kind of build this journey. Now, British Triathlon work with Accenture, who, like any organisation, need supporting partners. Now, this first episode is going to be focused on kind of like looking at health and well-being and how triathlon has helped emerge through into an Olympic sport, how it's now broadening its offering as an Olympic sport, and how really it makes an offering for a huge amount of people to get into health and fitness. Yes, we've got the gym. Yes, we've got many other fitness opportunities, but triathlon's pretty cool, and it's, grown in popularity over the last couple of years, and we're going to shine a little bit of a spotlight on triathlon over these episodes. So all 3 of these episodes have been released on one day, so you should find them in your iTunes feed or your podcasting feed, however you are listening to this right now. Anyway, it's episode 1 with British Triathlon and Accenture. Enjoy. So here we are joined by Ben Bright, Steve Casson. We are talking about triathlon, well-being, human performance. Gentlemen, hello.
Hello. How you doing, man?
I'm very well. You two look fit and healthy, which is what we expect. You're British Triathlon, Christ. Guys, I want the audience, the people that are listening, to understand your background, what you do. You're in this amazing environment of working with elite athletes, but tell me a little bit about your journey and where you've come from, to give people an insight into just what you do.
I was born in New Zealand, brought up in New Zealand, so that meant obviously I had to play rugby as a child.
Good
so my family moved to Australia when I was 12, 13, and I started to get into triathlon at about the age of 14. So I started out not particularly good. I remember the first event I ever did had about 130 people in, and I think I finished about 125th, something around there. But worked at it, eventually became an elite athlete, represented both Australia and New Zealand, because I had parents from one from each country. So went to the Olympics in Sydney in 2000, representing New Zealand. Had an injury that unfortunately curtailed my career at that point, which then opened the door for me into coaching. I went to Hong Kong for 4 years, lived in Hong Kong for 4 years, a couple of years as a triathlon coach and a couple of years as a swimming coach.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2005 I came to the UK, started working here in Loughborough as an assistant coach. Been working pretty much that whole time for British Triathlon, apart from a bit of a break in about 2010. And I've been the head coach for the Olympic program for the last 5 or 6 years now.
Cool. So if you're 5 years in, it means you're doing it right. They're keeping you around.
The goal, when I first was successful with the job as the head coach, my goal was to survive an Olympic cycle because it hadn't been done up till that point. So the goal now is to survive 2 Olympic cycles, and I'll have done pretty well if I can do that.
Nice. Steve?
So my background in sport has been lifelong as well, but not quite to the high acclaims of Ben, my colleague here. I started out as a young swimmer to a fairly decent standard and swam in army finals as a young soldier. I spent quite a few years in the military and eventually came to a point about 10 years ago where I decided that I enjoyed my sport and involvement in sport more than I did my job. Mm-hmm. So I took a bit of a leap of faith and forced myself into various coaching environments alongside people that are now my colleagues in British Triathlon, working with some of the elite juniors in the system, helped those guys move on to a good standard, and with great satisfaction see those kids moving on to the world-class programme these days. And about 7 years ago I started to get involved in the so-called new sport of para-triathlon. And at the time I would have had no reason to believe or even wonder whether I had the aptitude to do that. But a guy who's the current head coach of British Triathlon's para team, Johnny Ryle, said it's just coaching. And that is a fair comment. It is just coaching, it's just problem solving, seeing what the challenges are and helping people to overcome them and move on to become elite performers. So eventually that version of the sport evolved into being a Paralympic sport, and that in turn attracted UK sport funding, and so we've got one of the most accomplished and well established programs for supporting para triathletes, and I'm proud to have been part of that pretty much since its inception. 4 or 5 years ago, more formally with UK sport funding a bit more recently than that.
Well, there's two really nice things that you kind of mentioned in your brief intro there, of you getting into the para side of sport. There's almost a fear from you as a coach of like, ooh, I'm not quite sure how to maybe deal with some of those individuals. It's different. And then there was a friendly ear, a bit of advice that said, hey, it's just coaching, like they're just people, just work with what's in front of you. I, as a coach myself, find that fear entering into a new environment is a problem area for a lot of people. As a coach, how do you look to advise people, whether it's on an elite level or an everyday level, how do you almost encourage people to just take that step where they're literally building the wall of fear in front of them to say, I can't do that because I'm not experienced, because we've all got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah. And as coaches, part of our responsibility is to make that environment accessible, and that doesn't just mean opening doors and putting ramps in place and things like that. Literally, it's got to appeal. It's got to be, the environment that you're creating has got to present a level that is achievable. So creating the right environment as well as providing encouragement to give people the opportunity to get involved in the sport. And I think it's a really good parallel that you draw. It's not just about para triathletes, it's about new athletes who are perhaps a bit anxious about getting involved in sport for the first time if they never have done before.
Yeah, I think what's important to highlight is that people look at an athlete and they almost feel that an athlete is infallible because they've built strength, resilience, whereas they'll still fear a race. They'll still be nervous. They'll probably be thinking even more than the average person on the street of what's going to happen at the weekend or at the race, because there's almost so much at stake. Whereas because we only see the highlight reels, the Instagram videos, the podium finishes on Facebook, people don't really identify with all the different emotions that an athlete will go through every day, right?
The insecurities that every person's got insecurities. And from athletes that we've got who are multiple Olympic medalists, and it's pressure, isn't it? And everyone deals with it in different ways, but it exists. I remember distinctly in Rio last year, for the women's race, not just our athletes, but across the board, it ended up being quite a negative race, and a lot of that was because of athletes just being afraid. And as Steve said, I think one of the biggest things that we need to do at the sort of top end of the sport, at the elite level, but it needs to go all the way through the sport, is that question of how do we create an environment that's just welcoming, that's really open. Because first of all, I think triathlon's got a huge opportunity to engage with a vast amount of people, and I think that's our sort of USP against a lot of other sports. But also For high level performance, it's the same thing. As how do you break down the barriers so people don't feel that fear, because when you're fearful, then you're not open, you're not able to sort of express yourself, for want of a better term. And that's when you've got a really talented athlete, whether it's an Olympic or in para, you just want them to demonstrate what they're capable of. You want them to have the freedom to just, hey, I'm good at this, I'm going to go and show you how good I am at it, and that for me is what sport should be about. But then, as you say, coming back right down to the base level, it's just about enjoyment and someone having the opportunity and feeling the confidence to go and engage in something that they might not have done before.
The way that I frame sport or competition or fitness is that, one of my strap lines as a coach is that I want people to live an awesome life. And what that looks like for everyone is very different. But sport is a way to challenge your energy, channel your energy, challenge yourself, be physically active, which is really important for everyone. And what I think some people need to get away from, and hopefully they'll feel this from this podcast, is that we don't really want to be comparing ourselves to everyone else. Like, you guys are coaching incredible athletes. They're all different people. They're doing their own things. They've got their own goals. Really, the main thing that we want to develop is an ability to just better ourselves every day. Work in a supportive environment. Feel that you're in a positive community. And I think some of that comes from a baseline. I want to talk about that baseline now. I want this to be the focus of this podcast episode, is the kind of baseline of having your health and actually having that platform to be able to be a high performing individual, however that looks to you. Now, as coaches, what are your baseline health and well-being kind of markers? If you're going to work with an elite athlete or a general public individual, what are you looking at to say, okay, this person's actually in a good place to train. They're ready to handle a training regime. Actually, we need to go back and look at X, Y, and Z. What does good health and well-being look like to you guys?
So straight away, as I listen to you talk there, Ben, it all resonates with me. When you're talking about the well-being of the athlete and readiness to enjoy and fulfill themselves, you're starting to look at things like the balance of what they're doing. So markers that we would look for in the elite athletes will be very similar to some of the audience of this podcast that either are into their sport already or want to get involved in their sport. If you haven't got the balance correct, if there are too many stresses in your life, and that's physical stresses as well as emotional stresses and pressures of work and family and all the rest of it, then it could go the other way. It could actually start to undermine your health and well-being, and I include in that your mental health and well-being as well. So finding the right balance involves making sure that you are getting enough rest and recovery. Triathlon attracts people that are a little bit obsessive compulsive, as does a lot of endurance sport, and one of the potential downsides there is trying to do too much, trying to cram too much training into an already busy lifestyle, and the warning signs of that can be tetchiness and irritability around family and friends because you're just too tired and run down from doing it all. So you're looking for that enjoyment element. You can see the spark in their eyes that they're still enjoying it, still love getting up every day to do their training, and it isn't impacting on the rest of life.
Sure. Then from a kind of almost like a basic training periodization perspective, we talked about sleep, rest, recovery. As an elite coach, there must be a fine line to draw between the days that we need to push ourselves and the days that we don't. And an athlete and an everyday individual will have to know this. What advice could you give someone to say, okay, I'm feeling a little bit tired. Is it just that I've missed 30 minutes, an hour extra sleep, and actually I can get on the bike or in the pool and push myself? Or how do I listen to my body and say, today's not the day to train. I need to rest and give my body just a little bit more recovery?
It's at the elite level, it's the $1 million question. In many ways, there's a lot of money invested into looking at different markers and metrics of when the athlete's primed to train, or when they might be adapting to training that they've previously done, or they're getting into an overtrained state. And the bottom line with it is that it's know thyself, you know, and so I think that's the beauty of that. But that is the beauty of exercise, because part of doing exercise is learning about yourself, and I think it's one of those things that you can't, until you begin to know the athlete, or the athlete really understands themselves properly. It's almost the unanswerable. What is just tiredness? One of the things we do, you know, absolutely look for in our guys. You're going to wake up some morning, and you're going to feel a bit tired and lethargic. You've trained the day before. It's completely not. You've probably trained the last 3 weeks every single day. You know, 3 times a day. You're going to be tired. What's the difference between being overtrained and just a little bit of lethargy getting out of bed? One of the key things is, I've been struggling to get out of bed now for the last 4 or 5 days. That's not normal.
Yeah. Great.
And you know, what's the quality of what you've been able to do in the past week? Is the quality of the training you've been doing dropping off? And also, but the snapshot, I would say, is in that moment when you are maybe struggling getting out of bed and not quite sure, is, I always just say, get out, do something, and assess how you feel after the first 5 minutes, because quite often it's just like you just need to clear the system, you know, and actually what the body needed was to get out and move. But then if you do 5 minutes and you go, actually I don't feel any better or I feel worse, that's probably your body saying, you know, you probably need to have a bit of a break.
I think people listening, I want you to identify with that, because these guys are elite level coaches, and they're telling you, if you get 10 minutes into a ride and you feel like it's going to do you worse, you know, more harm than good, get off the bike, go home, rest up, try again tomorrow, because, you know, that might be the start of a cold, you know, it could be the start of anything, and really we then haven't looked after our baseline variable of well-being, have we? Which is really, really important. In an elite level and a basic level, there needs to be an element of periodisation. How would you recommend that someone looks at a basic level, their periodisation? Like, because the question I get all the time as a coach is, and it's a super simple question, but everyone wants to know, like, how many days a week should I go to the gym? And, you know, you kind of have to say 4, 5, 6. I think what's really important to try and get people to understand is that everyone has different stressors, and if you're working really hard, not sleeping well, to me it tells us that our training needs to adhere to that and change. And if our recovery capacity is brilliant, then by all means train every day like an absolute animal. How would you advise people to sort of circumnavigate that for themselves?
I think a sensible approach is a little bit of self-discovery. So embark upon something sensible and see if that's going to work for you. So if we just talk about it in blocks of time, blocks of training. So at the elite level, we would look at the whole Olympic or Paralympic cycle as one level that needs to be periodised over 4 years. But if we bring it down to something a little bit closer to home, a little bit easier to get your head around right now, and think about a month of training, then there are 2 things for an athlete or a person at home listening to this podcast thinking that they want to get fit and healthy to approach this. Think about how you're going to tackle a week, and think about how much training do I currently do. If it's none, then start thinking about perhaps I'll do something on alternate days. If you're already used to doing some training in the week, perhaps train through the week and have a day or 2 days off at the weekend, and then see how your body responds to that. Gradually progress to increasing your training load, and then whether that's swim, bike and run, or in the gym, or just keeping fit doing various sporting activities, that's absolutely fine. But if you've got a partner at home or family to keep an eye on you as well, thinking back to what we were just saying before, if you're starting to get tetchy and irritable with people, use that as feedback. You know, it's your own biofeedback that, yeah, maybe I'm not coping with this as well as I would like, and take some recovery.
100%.
I think one of the points that Steve makes there, and it works on at the elite level or that, you know, just absolute beginner level, is start with something that you absolutely know you're capable of. Don't start with something that you think, I hope I can do that, or I might be able to do that, or at my absolute best I could have done that.
Or I wish I could do that.
Or my mates are doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Think about, and at the elite level, what we find is they'll generally go, I can do this much and raise the bar incredibly high, and they might be able to sustain that for a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, and then crashing heap, and you start from scratch again. And so you go, well, okay, well, let's cut about a third out of that, because we know you can do that. And if we get to there, we can always go somewhere. We can always build from that. But if we're already at our peak, it's probably going to be too much. And where do we go when you've done that? The flip side, I think, for someone who, take the example of someone who isn't currently doing any exercise or hasn't exercised for quite a long time, start out with something just, I know that I can do that. And if that's a 10-minute walk jog, or a 10-minute brisk walk, or whatever the start point is, start with something that you go, I absolutely know I can do that. And the sense of achievement that you get from completing it, and then not being an absolute mess the following day, means that you're far more likely then to go out and do and go again and build on that. Whereas if you do something that you either aren't able to achieve, or you can't walk downstairs for 3 days because you've overdone it, you're probably less likely to try and build on what you've achieved. So I think starting out with that real bite-sized chunks of stuff that you absolutely know you're capable of doing is really important.
I think listening to your body, we could sum up, is a bit of a theme of this first episode. And I think people, in my experience as a coach, they learning to trust your body is a skill you refine over time. And I want people listening to this to know that they can trust their body. And I think you can do that when you use external people and environments to inspire you and motivate you and give you advice and information. But ultimately, you need to come at it from your own desires, your own goals, your own wants, because you're doing this for your own reasons. You're not doing it potentially to go on the podium at the Olympics. You're doing this because maybe you just want to show yourself what you're capable of. And I think once you start to compare yourself to yourself and be quite intrinsic about why you're on this journey, you can actually believe your own body and say, do you know what, yeah, I do need to rest today, or no, it's not okay that I feel tired. Because ultimately, we want physical activity to add quality of life to people's overall well-being in life. Like, if we're doing all this training and at the end of the week, at the weekend, we're grouchy all weekend, we're tired, your wife's moaning at you because, why are you tired? Oh, it's because I've been doing this triathlon training. Then has the triathlon training now added quality of life, or has it taken away? So I really want people to get that. Anyway, that is it for part one. We are going to do 2 more episodes of this podcast. So join me on the next episode with Ben and Steve, and we will be talking about the specifics of triathlon training, the entry points, what you need to consider, and I'm sure lots more. Join us on the next episode. Right, that is the end of episode 1. Thank you for tuning in. Please tune in to episode 2, which is right around the corner. All you got to do is make a couple of clicks. Thank you very much for British Triathlon and Accenture. I think it has been a great podcast. And on episode 2, what can you expect? Well, we're going to be talking all about actual triathlon, about kind of like getting started, equipment, where you can do races, what the races mean, like loads of stuff. It's going to get a little bit triathlon geeky now. Anyway, if you have come over from another environment and you've never heard of this podcast before, you're new to the show, well, welcome. If you go to bencoomber.com, you'll find all about me. If you go to Ben Coomber on any social network, you'll find cool stuff that I post. Otherwise, subscribe to this show. There's an immense array of really cool guests that I've had on the show, as well as me talking shop myself, all around health, fitness, and personal development. Anyway, I will see you on episode number 2 of this British Triathlon podcast special. Goodbye.